Good afternoon. I'm Kim Lajana, the Associate Director at the Center for Educational Outreach, and I'm here to welcome you to today's Faculty Forum on Outreach and Engagement. At the Center for Educational Outreach, we strive to inform, engage, and inspire with a particular interest in attracting a diverse student body to the University of Michigan. We do so by supporting faculty, staff, and student organizations involved in outreach, and by sponsoring programs such as today's Faculty Forum. We also want to thank our co-sponsor, the Office of Research, for its support for today's event. It's an exciting time to be at the University of Michigan. We have a university president who is invested in public engagement and vocal about making a strong, positive impact on society. As a scholar of higher education, I turn to Ernest Boyer's seminal work and words from over 30 years ago, that the confidence of the nation's campuses themselves has grown during those times when academics were called upon to serve a larger purpose, to participate in building of a more just society and to make the nation more civil and secure. That the Academy must become a more vigorous partner in the search for answers to our most pressing social, civic, economic, and moral problems, and must affirm its historic commitment to what he called the scholarship of engagement. One way to do this and advance President Schlissel's public engagement initiative is to harness your broader impact. If educational outreach is something you want to explore and incorporate into your work, the Center for the Education of Outreach offers consultation to help you flesh out your ideas and provide resources and relationships to support a project or an initiative you're passionate about. Today's forum is the fourth in our series this year and our first with an outside speaker. We have one more scheduled on April 11th with the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, and consisting of a presentation emphasizing the many ways they interact with students and schools across the state and highlighting the many different forms of outreach across the school. It promises to be both informative and entertaining and will be followed by a wine and appetizer reception. So please mark your calendars and be on the lookout for upcoming announcements, as we hope you'll join us. An important element of each faculty forum is the opportunity to network with others engaged in such work during the reception that follows the formal presentation. So please plan to stay around after to mix and mingle over some cookies and coffee. So I'm between you and the person you came to hear from. I'd like to take a minute to welcome and introduce Dr. Susie Iacono. Dr. Iacono leads the Office of Integrative Activities at the National Science Foundation. She received her PhD from the University of Arizona in Information Systems and her MA and BA from the University of California, Irvine in Social Ecology. She is joining us today to deepen our understanding of broader impacts. Let's give her a warm welcome to the University of Michigan.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was delightful. I'm sorry I'm missing the wine and cheese and the art, though, but cookies and coffee, hey, you know, that's good, too. So I've had a delightful day here, meeting with small groups. I've learned a lot from you about what's going on here at the Michigan campus, and I hope that you've also learned a bit about what's going on at the National Science Foundation and that it actually helps you in your career. So I bring you warm welcome from NSF. So this is the new building. It is no longer in Arlington. Don't get off at the Ballston stop on the Metro, the Orange Line, because we won't be there. We're at the Eisenhower stop in Alexandria, a beautiful, beautiful new building. The security is a little tighter, so fair warning, when you come to NSF, come about a half an hour before because it's even worse than airport security. But we brought the same mission with us, basically to stay at the forefront of science and engineering, research and education. And so this mission really drives us to really be leaders across the globe and to show our leadership in lots of forward-looking ways. So let's look at NSF a little bit by the numbers. So we're very proud of some of these numbers. The first one over here is this 93%. And so 93% of the funds that we receive from Congress flow through the National Science Foundation to you, not just to Michigan, but to all of academia and some not-for-profits and museums across the country. So the money that we receive is really for the nation. We're also proud about the volume of work that we can handle, about 50,000 proposals each year. About 11,000 of those get awarded. Yes, we would like a higher success rate. Please talk to your congressman or woman or your senator about that. But we're touching tons of people, right? Almost 400,000 people through these grants. And we've had now 231 Nobel Prizes, prize winners who have received funding from NSF. And why do we do that? Well, we do it because we have had, over the years, a significant number of discoveries. Significant investments have helped lead the way to science and engineering that led to Google. So who knew back in the 1990s that the digital library initiative would end up with, in the annual report, in a little, oh yes, by the way, and one of my students has gone off and established a company called Google, right? But it came from that funding from NSF, really spurred by that funding. And now, of course, the biggest thing this year has been LIGO. The LIGO scientists won Nobel Prizes this year. They were in Sweden. And so it's only 100 years since Einstein delivered his theory. So in 100 years, you know, we delivered on his theory, right? Sometimes it takes long-term basic research to go on and for us to risk the investments to really come up with the prizes. Okay, how do we do this? Well, NSF has a merit review process, and these are the two merit review criteria that we use. And this is what I'm going to talk about. What I was asked to talk about was about broader impacts. And you see these simple words up here, like 2 little lines for intellectual merit and 4 little lines for broader impacts. Who knew that that little bit of text could bring us so much trouble? And so this broader impacts notion is also embedded in our most recent strategic plan. We have a brand new one out on the street, so if you have not read NSF's strategic plan, please, this is your homework assignment, please go read it, because it really does give you kind of an inside view as to what we're thinking currently. It also continues what we've been doing for many years, but hopefully in new directions. Okay, so here's a short history of the broader impact criterion at NSF. 1974, NSF had 11 criteria. I'm not sure what they all were, but by 1982, there were 4 criteria. They had been reduced: research competence, merit of the research, utility, and effect on infrastructure. Okay, then we moved to 1986, and NSF officially utilized merit review as opposed to peer review, because NSF realized that there are often non-technical factors that come into the decisions about what proposal to fund. In 1996, we reduced the number from 4 down to 2. It was the 2 that you saw up there, intellectual merit and broader impacts. In 1998, we established accountability around the broader impact criterion. So what had happened between 1996 and 1998? Well, we told everyone that they had to address broader impacts in their proposals. And so those of you who were around in that period, what happened? Nobody wrote about broader impacts in their proposals, right? So we told the reviewers you should address the broader impacts in the review. So guess what happened? No one addressed broader impacts. And so we made at this point, a point to say, if you do not address broader impacts in your proposal, we will return it without review. And we did that very, very heavily in the late 1990s, and we did it manually. It was a subjective decision. Today, there's a section that you have to fill out, and if that's blank, the system automatically rejects it. Okay, moving on, the early 2000s. So we archived some criteria or subcategories under broader impacts that had been used for a very, very long time. In 2010, American Competes legislation from Congress said, NSF, thou shalt have these 8 categories for broader impacts. In 2011, the National Science Board kind of addressed what had happened in the legislation. By 2016, we instituted in our NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPG, now 9 broader impact categories that covered what we historically had always covered, plus what was in America Competes. In 2017, AICA, American Innovation and Competitiveness Act, says, NSF, thou shalt have 7 broader impacts criteria to use. So this is just to tell you that it is not straightforward. Okay, so here are the AICA categories, the 7 that I just mentioned. And let's go down to number 5. And here you see that they're asking us to develop an American STEM workforce that is globally competitive. And the student range that they focus on is pre-kindergarten through grade 12 STEM education and teacher development and improved undergraduate STEM education. So they left out who? Graduate students, right? So in the AICA, there's no mention of graduate students. They also leave out research infrastructure, which is an important component of what NSF does. So I point these out because I want to now refer to the archived 5 categories. And so these are important because they're a little bit more even in terms of what they cover than the ones that we see in legislation. But the first one is particularly important because it's about advancing discovery while also training the next generation. So it covers all students. So it covers the K through 12, the undergraduate, the graduate, the postdoc, all students are there. Then we have broadening participation, enhanced infrastructure for research and education, broadened dissemination, and benefits to society, which is incredibly broad. So there's lots of differences. There are some overlaps, and I'm going through all this because I'm going to be presenting some data here in a minute so that you can see what these differences are. So for the original category, we had this supporting college students and postdocs, but there's no particular mention of K through 12. In the new AICA, it combines STEM and workforce development, just like I mentioned, but no 13 through postdoc, no research infrastructure. And then the PAPG, with 9 categories, tries to be the most inclusive of any policy document to date. Okay, so why broader impacts? And so I read recently some historical documents where the directors of NSF would try to explain what would happen at NSF, and they would say that non-technical considerations have always come into play over the years. because there are always more great scientific projects than we can afford to fund at any given time. And so we have to balance our portfolio, right? We have to do it geographically. We have to think about the types of institutions. We have to think about underrepresented minorities, gender, disabilities. All of that comes into play when we're developing our portfolio. And so clear criteria are absolutely critical if our reviewers are really going to understand what we're asking them to do when they come in and look at these proposals. And I should mention that NIH still uses a very large number, I think it's 8, and they use scores, numerical scores, and so it's a very rigid system. And so they actually start at the top funding and go down to as much as they can afford, and then they stop. And they're driven by what the study panels recommend. At NSF, it's not that way. So we have our panels, we have our ad hoc reviews, but at the end of the day, it's the program director who's an expert. We're asking that program director, or sometimes a set of program directors, to use their best judgment and to really develop a portfolio that's driving that program forward in directions that it should go in. So we're not driven by a rigid numerical system or weighting system or anything like that. Okay, so how does this work? So I mentioned this important accountability aspect to broader impacts. And so you know, if you're a proposer, that if you submit a proposal that does not discuss broader impacts, it will be returned without review immediately, right? So it will not come to NSF any longer. We will not consider it. We will not make any judgments. So you may also know that if you get reviews back from the people who are looking at your proposal, they're asked to address the intellectual merit and the broader impacts, and they must do that, or their review will not be accepted. The same thing with the panel summary. When there's a panel, they have to address both of those criteria. Similarly, the program director, when he or she writes the review analysis, which is the summation of the whole merit review process, they are also asked and told you must address in the review analysis the broader impacts. And the division director will turn it back and say, I won't accept this if you do not do this. We know that as a proposer, you have to submit an annual report and a final report, and similarly, you must address broader impacts. And then after it's all said and done, some years later, we have committees of visitors who come in, and guess what? They are asked to address broader impacts along with intellectual merit. So we set up this very strict accountability system to make sure that no one can say, yeah, you have that on the books, that broader impacts criterion, but you don't really use it, because we do. Okay, so here's the merit review process at NSF. And phase 1 is where you're preparing proposals, right? The opportunity is announced, and we give 90 days as a rule before the proposal has to be submitted. But as I said, it cannot be submitted any longer if it doesn't have broader impacts. In phase 2, we're selecting reviewers, we're going through peer review. The program officer gives a recommendation back to the division director, who concurs or not on it. And then finally, once all that has happened, then in phase 3, it goes to our Division of Grants and Agreements, where they're looking at all the financial aspects, right? And what you see is broader impacts is overlaid this entire process, ensuring that every person who touches that proposal is taking it into consideration. So in general, our committee of visitors have been very positive about NSF's merit review process. They write long reports. Has anybody here ever been on a COV? No? Well, maybe someday you will be asked to come and you review an entire division's portfolio. Of course, it's a random sampling because there's thousands of proposals. But one of the things that the COVs always say is that the broader impacts criterion is not clear, right? And so some COVs suggest more extensive training, and we absolutely agree. But here are some of those comments. And so this goes to the weighting of the two criteria. As I said, we don't really weight them, but they're seeing that it's inconsistent, or they think that there's confusion about what sorts of activities could constitute broader impacts. There's a whole wide range of interpretations among the PIs and the reviewers about what constitutes broader impacts. Sometimes the reviewers tend to use broader impacts more as a tiebreaker, and I'll come back to this because I think that that often does happen, right? And so these comments go on and on. So now there's a whole literature on broader impacts and NSF's merit review. So there is some folks who, outside of NSF, who were looking at research ethics and taking broader impacts into consideration. Mark Rothenberg was our historian who wrote about this over the long history of NSF. There's a National Alliance for Broader Impacts that really brings together the institutions, all the universities, brings all the broader impacts practitioners together to really think about what the challenges are and how they can help their university community to really write good proposals and strong broader impacts sections. And then finally, NSF itself has been doing a lot of analysis, and that's what I'm going to talk about here today. So I went through this kind of long diatribe to get you to the point where possibly you can understand what these data are and what they mean. I really believe it's best for us to start from a place where we know what is actually going on with broader impacts rather than pontificating or saying what should happen and really kind of going the normative route. I think we can ask those questions after we all understand what is happening. So we took an empirical look at broader impacts that's been going on for about 3 years. We've had a whole bunch of retreats with senior leadership at NSF. We've had reports go to OMB. They have come back to us with questions. And we continue to do presentations just like this one, where we get feedback from the community about what we're seeing in the data and kind of what that triggers in you about where we might possibly change and improve, because at the end of the day, that's really what we're after. So we started with a number of hypotheses, and one is that broader impacts has changed over time, and we should expect to continue to see it evolve. This so-called confusion that the COVs are looking at, perhaps it's variation in the size of the award, in the different disciplines, the solicitation language and requirements, or another reason that we haven't even thought about today. And hypothesis 3 is that there are probably some common practices in panels like tie breaking. Let's see if we can find them. Okay, so here's our first graphic. And so what this is all of the awards for 2014 that came to NSF and were awarded eventually, broken down into 3 categories. And so these are research, education, and research infrastructure. So every single award is coded as one of those types. And so this does not mean that all the research directorates are in the left-hand column, that the education directorate is in the middle, and the big research projects are on the side, because they're much more interwoven than that. So the education component is actually embedded throughout all of the directorates at NSF, like the REU program, for example, or Advance, right? So all of the directorates fund those. And there, in the research section, there's the science of education. So don't assume that these fit any particular directorates, but they do represent the compilation of all those projects in that 1 year that were awarded. And so I'm using here those 5 archived categories. Remember, they're advancing discovery, benefit to society, broadening participation, dissemination, and enhancing infrastructure from the bottom to the top. And so what you can see is predominantly what the PIs are writing in the project summary is about their students. So 50% of the research, all of the terms that are used and all of the broader impact sections in the project summary related to their students, 50.77%. And then the second largest under research was research infrastructure, right? If you look at education, enhancing infrastructure, if you look at education, 54% focused on the students, and this is the broad panoply of all students, and there 17.18% focused on broadening participation. Under the research infrastructure coding, you have 37% talking about students, 14% on broadening participation, and 27+% talking about enhancing infrastructure, as you would expect, because these are infrastructure projects, right? So if you add the students plus broadening participation, what you can see is broadly across NSF, most of the PIs submitting proposals that become awards are talking about people, right? With the exceptions of research infrastructure, where research infrastructure gets a lot of play. Okay, now I'm moving to the panel summaries. So again, remember, these are different people, right? So this is a scribe in a panel who was one of the reviewers, now writing the panel summary to that award, recommending an award. And so what we see is something that's very, very similar to what the PIs wrote. And so I have to applaud that. Yay, bravo. I'm glad that the reviewers are seeing, and responding to what the PIs are saying, right? But we can look at a different score, and you see some very interesting differences. So I have a computer scientist on my staff, Nick Daly, and he uses what he calls his weirdness algorithm, because this is very large sets of data. And so he can separate out and show very unique aspects of the data. And so if the reviewers, which is in the top, were saying exactly the same as what the PIs were saying, which is the summary on the bottom, the scores would all be along the 0% line. There would be no bars showing difference. But what's interesting about this is we see that the reviewers are paying a lot more attention to broadening participation and to dissemination than is warranted in the proposal, right? So this is a very interesting thing. And so I asked Nick to go start pulling out some of the text. This is for broadening participation. And so he searched on all the PI is terms, and this is all unstructured text. And so you see things like the PI is also a woman in computational area of cognitive science and underrepresented population, track record of treating students in underrepresented groups. The PI is a woman from an underrepresented group, an Hispanic woman. The PI is a member of a WOLI underrepresented group. However, as a woman, the PI is already making a significant impact as a role model. And so you see the reviewers making arguments and trying to influence this project where they're recommending an award. They can't make an award because it's the National Science Foundation that does that, but they're doing their job by picking out, elements of broadening participation. Okay, so now I'm moving to those 7 categories, right, the AICA categories, which are very different than the 5 archived, right? And so what you see here is the biggest category across the 3 is no longer students, but it is broadening participation. It's the orange up here under research, education, and research infrastructure. And then you see developing workforce in that confusing text in that legislation that says developing workforce and doing STEM K through 12, right? And so again, though, you add up these two categories and you see that the preponderance of what the PIs are writing about, even when you use the AICA categories, is people, right? And so there's some lip service to the other categories, but not very much. Okay, so let's turn now to the panel review. So this is the reviewers coming in, and they're doing pretty much the same thing. The biggest categories are the orange and the gray, the orange being broadening participation, and the gray being developing the workforce. They're talking about people. But let's apply that weirdness algorithm to it, and you can see that in the reviews, they're talking about advancing health and welfare, broadening participation, and developing the workforce, while the PIs have kind of a greater variety of economic competitiveness, industry participation, national security, public literacy. Okay, so when we think about students, it's interesting to think which students are being picked up in which of these large investment categories. So if you look at infrastructure, where is the tallest blue line? It's postdocs. Does that make sense? A large infrastructure project is probably very interested in hiring postdocs. If you look at research, what's the tallest yellow line? So it's doctoral student and PhD student. And then if you look at education as an investment category, right, you look, the tallest lines here are student assessment, undergraduate research, undergraduate, et cetera. So they're really focusing on undergraduates. So it's very different student types, right, depending on what kind of research you're submitting to NSF. Okay, now I thought you might like to look at the directorates. All of you are coming from very different research areas, and you probably all submit your proposals to very different places at NSF, and you're probably wondering what's going on there. And so we can see that, again, that blue, we're back to our 5 archived categories, and the blue is the students. So pretty much across the board, except for SBE, right? So SBE, it's still the largest category, but it's not as large as the other categories, right? So it's focusing the project summary, the PIs, is focusing on the students and the mentoring that they're going to do. And then you see, again, the gray, the broadening participation. Whoops. Broadening participation right here, right, still adds to the blue. So there's lots of emphasis on people, but interesting, what's this orange over here in SBE? Benefits to society, right? And so the second largest benefit to society is geo. And so when I hypothesize why are they spending, again, this is the PIs, more time talking about the potential benefits of their research than others, well, you could imagine, maybe it's because they're being attacked right now. They feel that they have to argue in ways that are different than others. Others, maybe it's taken for granted what the benefit is. They feel they have to spell it out to make really good, effective arguments. Of course, we don't know for sure. There's lots more research that has to be done to do this, but still, it's a possible, plausible hypothesis. Now, again, we look at the panel summaries, and it's, again, very similar. It is the people, the students, and it's, that broadening participation band with SBE, right? The panelists are also responding to the benefits to society. So is size, and geo more than the others, but we've got this dissemination category that is widely used by the reviewers, right? And so we'll talk later about why they are using it, but you could imagine that, again, they're trying to make arguments back to NSF, and they're saying that not only will this research be carried out, but they've already promised to be on the radio, to scale what they've done to other school systems, to bring in summer schools, whatever it is. But you can imagine that this broad dissemination becomes a very powerful argument from the reviewers back to NSF to fund this research. Okay, so now we're looking at the differences, and you see what I'm talking about, that below the line we have the PIs in the project summaries talking about lots of different things, but you have your reviewers really talking about dissemination and broadening participation in the reviews. Okay, so now we are looking at the project summaries for AICA. Again, a very similar kind of thing, and I'm going to try to go through this so we have a bit of time for questions. And the AICA panel reviews, very similar. There's a different set of categories, right? These are the 7 categories. And just as before with the 5, you see that that the broadening participation category really has taken over. The broadening participation category along with the STEM workforce category. And then when you look at the differences, you're seeing again that here in GEO, right, that they're really looking at advancing health and welfare, there's benefits to society, as well as SBE, when the reviewers are writing their panel summaries, whereas the PIs are really talking the whole gamut of all that's kind of available to them. Okay, and then we decided we should look at the declines. So are those vastly different from the awards? And so we had started looking at the awards just simply because they were all machine readable at one point in time and we could do the analysis. But now all the declines in 2014 are also machine readable, so we were recently able to make this comparison. And you see they're not vastly different from each other. That makes me feel good, because if we saw big differences, it could be a little bit shocking. And so what you see here, what this is focusing on, is a greater emphasis in the awards versus the declines in the project summary. So this is the PIs, right? And the PIs, they got declined, woe is me, and up here it's the PIs that got awards. And so again, the PIs are talking about benefits to society and advance in their students. And in the awards, they're talking much more about broadening participation, dissemination, and that kind of thing. Okay, we're almost done here, folks. So here is the declines, looking at the difference between awards and declines, but it's the reviewers' point of view. And again, the reviewers are not making significant differences in what they're saying in the reviews, whether it's a decline or award in terms of the topic. But you can again see the differences. So we're talking about in the reviews, the reviewers, and what are they talking about in the awards, what are they talking about in the declines, and across the board you see this dissemination and broadening participation. And then, so here we're looking at the differences between reviews and projects. So these are different people, right? And so we're looking at what the reviewers are saying versus what the PIs are saying, the same kind of thing. Okay, and then we're looking in the declines between the projects reviews and the project summaries. Very, very similar kind of finding in terms of what they're looking for. And then we have a ratio over a ratio over a ratio. And so this top set is greater discussion in the award reviews compared to the proposals. And the bottom is greater discussion in the decline reviews compared to the proposals. So we're looking at the award reviews. What are the reviewers and the awards compared to the proposals focusing on? But it's really the same thing. They're focusing on dissemination. They're focusing on broadening participation. Okay, so what are the takeaway messages here? So there's lots of differences across any way of slicing and dicing and looking at this data, but there's some similarities too. But broadly, people are really, really important. For the PIs, the focus is on students and broadening participation. For the reviewers, it's often broadening participation, workforce development. But research infrastructure and this dissemination category are truly important. I also think that the PIs are using more available categories than the reviewers, and that to me is an important finding, takeaway, because we're going to have to, I think, really think hard about the instructions for our reviewers. So again, when we look across the directorates, it's the same thing. People are the targets. Looking at the students, but also benefits to society and research infrastructure. And this element of looking at dissemination is so important, particularly for the awards, whether we're looking at awards or this ratio of ratio thing. So what does this mean? So I think we have to think about the categories. So even though all categories are used by someone, and it doesn't matter if it's AICA or if it's the 5 archived, we've done analysis with the 9 that are listed in our proposal guide. And people are using all of these categories. So all these interesting ideas are coming in. But I really feel like some categories are not very well understood, or they're rarely possible. And so I mentioned that I thought that the 5 archive were more kind of an even distribution, kind of at the same level, whereas the ones that are in legislation, it's like national security is one of them, economic competitiveness is the second one, right? Partnerships is the third one. So maybe we need to think up an index, because they're all part of benefits to society, right? They're all of national importance. And some proposals in geo, we're going to touch on some proposals coming out of science and engineering or physics are going to touch on other areas. And so we need to think about how we talk about these categories, but also how we do the analysis. But also some categories seem to be more influential. And that is more influential in getting an award or in tie-breaking in a panel. And so it seems to me that reviewers are really trying to boost up a project and to say, kind of like that list of the statements that I showed a few minutes ago, not only is this research great, but also the PI is a woman and comes from an EPSCoR state, and that kind of thing. But overall, the primary focus today is on young people, bringing up the next generation. And certainly that is absolutely critical. But I think that we have to ask, is this an appropriate use for broader impacts? Is this the main focus that we really want it to be on? Is it the next generation, or should we figure out how to broaden that? And again, the least focus was benefits to society. And it may be, as I said, some might be taken for granted for computer science or engineering, but SBE and GEO seem to be using them because they're needing to kind of argue for their right to be there at the table. The PI seem to use all broader impacts areas, not evenly, but they're all being used. But the most common one is what is at hand, which is, again, I think, mentoring the next generation. And so how important is broader impacts in the whole of NSF merit review? So as I said before, it's not a 50-50 proposition. It's not like they're two independent criteria. They really play with each other. They're really interdependent. And I think that's kind of the mistake that we make when we're writing proposals. We're treating like the science over here and the broader impacts over there. But really, it's about weaving them together in some interesting way, not novel, but effective way. I mean, it could be novel, I'm not arguing against it, but it's not necessarily novel, but some very effective way that really makes sense and shows your passion for what it is that you want to do should you receive that grant. Okay, so still lots of open questions. This is my last slide. So how can we increase understanding of what broader impacts, what BI is or it could be? And I think we have to continue this kind of analysis and really dig deeper into what people are actually saying in their proposals, what their reviewers are saying. I think we need to think about novelty. Are people being dinged because it's the reviewers are declaring it's not novel? And then think about how we react to that. I think we need to increase the clarity in the whole merit review process, right? So people need to understand that they're not shooting a proposal kind of into a big bin that we just turn at NSF and then we, like the lotto, we, pull out the winners. But there are lots of different people with different roles that touch every proposal and who are thinking about it from their role as they're supposed to do, right? And so how can we really, make this crystal clear so people understand that the PIs and reviewers will diverge in how they're looking at broader impacts because they have different roles to play. Over time, we should expect for this to evolve. And we really need to, I think, have big assessments of some of the efforts we've had at NSF. And so one of them is a merit review orientation pilot that will touch on implicit bias and will give clear guidance on broader impacts. And does that really change the satisfaction of PIs down the road in terms of the reviews that they get back? So the biggest complaint that we get out of this biennial survey that we do, and hopefully if you're a PI or a reviewer, you get that survey and you fill it out, is that the reviews are not of sufficient high quality for you to really know what to do to revise and resubmit your proposal. And so we really want to make sure that we can help in that regard. And then finally, we have to think hard about the role of the institution and collective impact models. So this should not be a one-off kind of situation where you're left alone by yourself to dream up over a weekend what you're going to write in your broader impacts section, right? And then you just submit it. You're kind of just throwing darts at this. We really need to plug into existing support structures at the university, and the university needs to plug into national infrastructures like the National Alliance for Broader Impacts, so that at the end of the day, we really are building knowledge bases for broader impacts, just like we do for our science, right? And so finally, I say, so what is it, intellectual merit is to publications as broader impacts is to what, right? What's the lasting societal benefit that we're aiming for, right, that goes beyond the end of any particular grant, but we're all working towards, but kind of fills in this area, this very broad area that we consider the broader impacts. Well, thank you for listening. I'll take any questions. Yes, go ahead.
Wondering if are you also thinking about looking at reports along with this in terms of what they're actually saying is coming out of the work?
Yes, so,
With the reviews?
yep, so we did that. And so one big analysis that we did compared what was in the original proposal with what was in the final report. They were a pretty close match. So we went, oh, this is like a sigh of relief for NSF that it looks like, at a minimum, people are writing about in their final reports what they promised they would do. So we need to go back and do more of this. It's just that we're using 2014 data, and I don't have final reports yet for all of the 2014 awards. And so that will come later when we can do a match. That was a sample that we looked at. We also are looking at what the program directors are saying. So we've done a match, right, all along. The program directors are talking a little bit more like the PIs, right? And so they're matching more closely what's in the proposal. And so that's what gives me reason to think that the reviewers, once they have recommended something for an award, they're trying to really impress on their program director, award this one because it's so great. Yeah, so we have lots more analysis that we can do in the future.
Hi. So I'm just starting to work with the faculty on the NSF career boards this year, and they really struggle with this whole idea. Do you encourage faculty to work with every age group, or even does it make sense to have them emphasize one over the other, or is it just...
So I think it has to be what is appropriate and what they're passionate about and what they have the expertise to carry out. I mean, whether it's feasible or not. So if you're in math and you've gone over to the education center that I learned about today, where they provide guidance, and they're helping you to work with middle school in the region. And so you really feel like you've got a handle on that, and they've plugged you in to the middle schools that are open and willing to take people, and you can say that in your proposal, then the reviewers are not in a place where they're uncertain about what really is this math person who's never, I don't see anything about math education in their whole history. I mean, how could they go over and talk to middle schoolers? That won't work. And so it's really about how it all fits together that is the most important to me. And the actual passion that comes through in the writing of, from the proposal.
I'm wondering, it seems like maybe what you were saying or what you could interpret from the results is that category of service or benefit to society is hard to make tangible, and maybe that's a reason why it receives less attention in the reviews and the proposal summaries or the panel summaries. Maybe you could touch on that, and also what thinking has gone on about how to make the benefit to society more tangible, more actionable, more quantifiable or descriptive as a type of broader impact.
So I don't think it's that exactly, but I think, remember, the benefits to society is a category in the 5 archived, right? In the AICA, there's a whole bunch of separate kind of benefits to society. And I think that the reason that SBE and GEO use those categories, the PIs, is because they're actually linking the GEO research to weather conditions or hazards or whatever. And the social science people are saying, if we do this research on veils in the Middle East, our soldiers will understand how better to deal with women when they're in that region, right? So I think that they're doing what probably everyone should do is to make that linkage, and they're doing it, in the proposal. So I think that and I think they're doing it right now because they're under attack. And there's lots of questions about whether that science should be funded or not. And I think they're trying to prove that it has been picked up and it has been used and it can save lives, right? I think some others don't use it because in their research community, it's taken for granted that there will be benefits. And so if it's going after dark matter or black holes, I think that there's some understanding in the astronomy physics community, astrophysics communities, that this will change how we think about the universe. So they're not saying that this will give us more economic competitiveness, right, or give us more national security or anything like that. So they're not kind of forced into making that linkage. But that's just a hypothesis with the amount of analysis that we've done to date. But going forward, so you have second part to your question. So I thought I'd like to do some analysis where we look under AICA categories and we make some indexes and lump those 7 together in a smaller number of indexes. And I think that those scores would rise. Nick.
You mentioned that there were considerations other than intellectual merit or even broader impact, strictly speaking, geographic distribution across the states, for example. And I wonder how much do you think those considerations impact the awards? And does it skew it one way or the other with that impact the results you find?
So geographic distribution does play a role, as well as type of institution, as well as new emerging areas of research. And none of those are strictly broader impacts, right? But those come into play with the program director making an argument back to the division director about why a proposal should be funded or not. And so it might be that a proposal got a lower score than some other proposals. And one would think you would just go to the one that has the higher scores, but the program director would say, yes, but I'm trying to grow this whole new area, and I haven't been able to fund anything to date. And here we've got a proposal that is pretty good, but it's just by a younger person who's less experienced. The proposal wasn't written as well. And that would make sense to a division director to say, okay, yeah, let's fund that. Right? Let's try out this young person, and if it's a new emerging area. So portfolio balance is very important to everything that we do. We certainly do not want to make all of our awards to the University of Michigan or to the state of Massachusetts or California. So we really have to ensure that other states, other jurisdictions, other types of institutions are getting awards too. Right, so the broader impacts does not capture everything that goes into the decision making. Yes.
You've talked a lot about statistics in a very interesting way. Could you maybe give a few examples of some really interesting broader impacts to just help us think about the topic?
Yeah. So my most interesting one was a quantum computer scientist at MIT who received a PCASE award, actually. And so he evidently was not getting very many undergraduates to come at all to his course. And so he named it Quantum Pizza. And he actually had pizza I guess, it delivered during his courses, right? And so he started getting more undergraduates and started getting them more seriously involved in quantum. He started a summer school. He went on the radio. I mean, this guy went on a full court effort to get young people into his class learning about quantum computing. And so when it came time to nominate him for a P case, which is after you get your career award, then you can be nominated for that, it was so easy to make that case because it was just so obvious what, in fact, he was doing. On the other hand, I really like it when broader impacts will focus on what has become effective in other places, and they're willing to go through the challenge, the work, to try to customize it to their own university. So Data Science for Social Good is a summer school that was started at the University of Chicago back now, God, probably 8-10 years ago. And when I Googled Data Science for Social Good, I see it at many, many universities. And of course, they had to customize it to their own needs, their own types of abilities, but that focuses on matching teams, student teams, with real clients that have data. So they bring data to the project, and the teams work on the data, and they're developing tools, new analytic techniques, and so they're helping real clients that have real-world problems to really uncover what's in their data that they couldn't do before because they didn't have the expertise or the tools. And they're able to attract many, many more women and underrepresented minorities because it's really, really focused on not just I'm going to sit in the corner and code, but I'm going to have real world impact. What I do is really going to touch human beings. They're some of my favorites.
Let's take a moment to thank Dr. Iacono again.
Thank you for having me.
So we're hoping that you're leaving this session with some new insights about NSF as well as the broader impacts program specifically. One of the reasons why we hold these events is to really support building a community where people with shared values can learn from each other as well as explore opportunities for collaboration. So I want to take a moment for you to get an idea of who's in the room. So I'm just wondering if anybody here is a faculty member who has had an NSF award, if you could just raise your hand or stand up and so people can look around and see you. Maybe talk to you a little bit afterwards about that process. If I could have staff members raise their hand who are involved with NSF projects and broader impacts, please raise your hands. So I don't know everybody in the room, but there are a few people that I do want to call out so that you can get to know one another a little bit and maybe try to meet each other over coffee and cookies. So one person I want to introduce is new to this sort of space, and that's Terry Kozdraowski. He's the new communications manager in the Office of VP of Communications. He's specifically focusing on public engagement, and he wants to talk to you to help get your stories to the broader community. If you turn around, you can see Terry. He's been in this position for 1 week, and so this is a good time to get him and really make sure that he can get your story to a broader audience. There are a couple people in the audience from the School of Education from CEDAR, which is the Center for Evaluation, Design. Thank you. And so if you guys could just wave your hands. So they support both around the front end of the proposal writing process as well as on the evaluation side. They work with schools and teachers, and just like we do. And so it's very common for us to send people their way to really think about this work with them. A couple other people I just wanted to mention. At the very beginning, I didn't introduce Dr. Collins, who many of you probably know is our executive director at the Center for Educational Outreach. He's a little under the weather today, which is why I'm emceeing. But if you don't know him already, you should. And he has been around the institution for quite some time and is one of the most, I'd say, strongest informal networkers. He met Dr. Iacono, and that's how this event happened. So if you are looking for a contact at the University of Michigan or elsewhere, really, I think in almost any area, I would highly recommend talking to him. So I'm confident he can help you, or he'll connect you to one or two people that you find extremely helpful in your work and supporting it. So with that, we know that U of M is a world of a space of informal and formal networks. That's how we get things done, and that's why we really try to provide the space for you all to work together, talk to one another, and find opportunities to work together. So we know your time is precious. We thank you for joining us today and spending it with us. The last group of people I just want to raise their hands are folks from the Center for Educational Outreach. There are a couple out in the audience, and they are here also to support your work and connect you to the right people. So with that, we hope we see you at the final faculty forum. I hope you take a minute and either meet a new colleague, a new friend, or talk to someone you haven't seen in a little bit. But the space is here for you to do that. And if you haven't talked to at least one new person, you've probably not done your job today. So with that, or at least I failed in mine. So with that, I hope you guys enjoy everything, and we hope to see you at the Museum of Art on April 11th for a great presentation and some wine and appetizers. So thank you.